There comes a moment in life when the familiar dynamics between parent and child begin to shift. After years, decades even, of nurturing, guiding, and making sacrifices, many parents eventually find themselves treated differently. It may begin subtly, with ignored advice or occasional dismissive remarks. Perhaps your grown children interrupt you, speak over you, or worse, treat you as if your presence is an inconvenience. This realization can be deeply painful. You might feel an urge to remind them of all you've done, the sleepless nights, the unwavering support, the endless giving. But experience tells us that anger and confrontation rarely lead to better understanding. In truth, such reactions often widen the gap rather than bridge it. Instead of conflict, a more effective path lies in making thoughtful internal shifts, subtle changes in the way you respond and carry yourself. These changes, while simple, can profoundly influence the way your children perceive and treat you. The first of these shifts is to stop seeking your children's approval. This may be difficult, especially if you've spent years trying to please them, putting their needs ahead of your own in hopes of earning their gratitude or affection. But the more you chase approval, the more likely you are to be taken for granted. Take, for instance, Mrs. Lillian Hartley, a woman who had once been a vibrant, independent business owner. As she aged, she began to cater entirely to her children's preferences, adjusting her schedule around theirs, agreeing to plans she didn't enjoy, and withholding her opinions to avoid conflict. "I just want to keep the family close," she would say. But instead of drawing her family nearer, her self-sacrificing behavior led to a loss of respect. Her children, seeing her constant compliance, began to overlook her feelings entirely. What Lillian didn't realize at first was that respect begins with self-respect. If you repeatedly compromise your own needs and opinions, you inadvertently teach others that they matter more than you do. To change this dynamic, one must begin by setting gentle yet firm boundaries. Say no when you need to. Share your thoughts, even when they may not be welcomed. Speak with kindness, but with certainty. Another essential shift is to resist the urge to argue when faced with disrespect. It's only natural to want to defend oneself when a child dismisses your words or disregards your perspective. But rarely does arguing win hearts. Respect is not demanded, it's modeled. It's in the way you carry yourself, especially when tested. Consider Mr. Charles Denham, a retired headmaster once respected by hundreds of students. At home, however, his grown children often interrupted him, scoffed at his opinions, and dismissed his input. Initially, Charles fought back. He raised his voice, listed his contributions, and reminded them of his role in their upbringing. Unfortunately, the more he argued, the less they listened. Eventually, Charles tried something different. He stopped arguing. He began to listen more attentively. He spoke with calm authority and refused to react emotionally to their provocations. Instead of seeking respect with words, he embodied it through presence. Slowly, his children noticed. They began to speak more carefully and listen more attentively, recognizing the quiet dignity he carried. When faced with a lack of respect, the goal is not to fight but to stand firm. Your behavior sets the tone. If you show that you do not require validation to know your worth, others begin to see that worth more clearly. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but consistency speaks volumes. In these early shifts, from approval seeking to self-respect, from arguing to leading by example, you lay the foundation for a healthier, more respectful relationship. You remind your children not through demands, but through your strength and grace, that you are someone who deserves to be heard, valued, and respected. As we continue exploring the path toward regaining respect from adult children, we arrive at a profound realization. Emotional independence plays a central role in how others treat us, especially our children. While it's only natural to seek love, validation, and closeness with those we hold dear, an overdependence on those things can unintentionally strain relationships. When parents rely too heavily on their children to feel seen or valued, they can unknowingly shift the balance of the relationship. This need, even when unspoken, becomes a silent weight. And that weight, over time, can make children feel more burdened than cherished. Let's consider the story of Mrs. Judith Moore, a devoted mother who had poured her entire heart into raising her 3 children. As they grew older and busier with their own families and careers, Judith found herself often sitting by the phone, hoping for their calls. When days went by without word, she would reach out instead, frequently, sometimes several times a day. Her messages were always loving. "I miss you. I wish we could talk more." Or, "I just want to hear your voice." But despite her sincerity, her children began to respond less and less. Judith felt hurt and confused. What she didn't realize was that her children were interpreting her outreach not as a gesture of love, but as pressure. Her need for closeness had become an expectation, and expectations, when unmet, often lead to resentment. One day, with a heavy heart, Judith decided to shift her focus. Instead of waiting for the phone to ring, she began filling her days with purpose. She enrolled in a watercolor class at the local library, started attending morning walks with a group of neighbors, and even began volunteering at a community garden. She wasn't doing this to prove a point. She was doing it to nurture her own spirit. And then something surprising happened. Her phone began to ring again, this time not out of guilt or obligation, but genuine interest. "What are you up to, Mom?" "Tell me about your class." Her children began to see her not just as their mother, but as a vibrant woman with a full life. They admired her independence. Their respect returned, not because she demanded it, but because she had grown into someone they respected. This leads us to another essential principle: setting and enforcing boundaries. Many parents are hesitant to draw lines with their adult children, fearing it will create distance or conflict. But in reality, boundaries are not barriers. They are expressions of self-respect. They teach others how we expect to be treated. Mr. Edward Langston offers a clear example. A retired architect and widower, Edward noticed that his children often treated his time as if it were endlessly available. They would cancel visits last minute, speak to him sharply when stressed, or show little interest in his thoughts. For a long time, Edward tolerated it. "They're busy," he told himself. "They don't mean harm." But deep down, it was beginning to wear on him. Eventually, Edward made a quiet but firm decision. He began speaking up. When one of his sons interrupted him during a conversation, Edward gently said, "I'd appreciate it if you let me finish." When a daughter dismissed his opinion, he replied, "It's okay if we disagree, but I'd still like to be heard." At first, there was resistance. There were awkward silences and even some mild frustration. But Edward didn't waver. He wasn't angry. He was resolute. Over time, his children adapted. They began showing up on time. They listened more attentively. They took his input more seriously. Why? Because Edward, through quiet consistency, reminded them of his worth. When you stand up for yourself without aggression, when you set boundaries with kindness but firmness, You teach those around you to treat you with the respect you deserve. This doesn't mean severing ties or creating confrontation. It simply means holding space for your dignity. The path to regaining respect from your children is not paved with lectures or guilt. It is built through emotional independence and clear boundaries. When you cultivate your own joy and draw healthy lines, you communicate your value not through words, but through action. And in doing so, you create an environment where mutual respect can flourish. As we come to the final part of this journey toward reclaiming respect from our adult children, we must now explore two final yet deeply transformative principles: choosing not to give endlessly without appreciation, and building a meaningful life outside of your children. These choices, though subtle in action, can powerfully reshape how others, especially family, see and treat you. One of the most common reasons respect fades in parent-child relationships is the well-intended but harmful habit of overgiving. As parents, we are naturally generous. We help without being asked, we offer support before it's needed, and we give out of love. But when this generosity is consistently met with indifference or entitlement, something begins to erode, not only in our relationship, but within ourselves. Take, for instance, the story of Mr. Leonard Fields, a retired small business owner who had spent most of his life putting his family first. Leonard had always been the dependable one, offering financial help when his children needed it, driving across town to assist with errands, and adjusting his own schedule just to be available. Yet over time, his children stopped expressing thanks. Requests turned into expectations. Help turned into obligation. When Leonard gently mentioned that he felt taken for granted, the response was dismissive. "You've always done it, Dad. We just assumed you liked helping." And therein lay the problem. His kindness had become so constant that it was no longer seen as a gift. It was seen as a given. One day, Leonard made a quiet decision. He wouldn't stop being generous, but he would start being mindful. He began asking himself a simple question: am I giving from a full heart or from a place of habit? If a request felt one-sided or unappreciated, he allowed himself to say no, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. At first, his children were surprised. There were a few raised eyebrows and perhaps some frustration. But gradually, something remarkable happened. They started saying thank you again. They asked before assuming. They began to see Leonard's time and help for what it truly was, a privilege, not an entitlement. And this leads us to the final, perhaps most powerful step: building a rich and fulfilling life that does not revolve around your children. When children sense that their parents have no source of happiness beyond them, they can feel a mix of pressure, discomfort, or even guilt. Over time, this may cause them to distance themselves, not because they don't love you, but because they feel unable to meet all your emotional needs. Consider the story of Ms. Claire Everly, a kind-hearted widow in her 70s. After her husband passed away, Claire's entire world became her adult children. She called daily, often multiple times, and routinely offered unsolicited advice. Despite her good intentions, her children began to feel overwhelmed. Their visits grew shorter. Their responses became clipped. Claire, feeling the distance, took it personally, but after reflecting quietly during a book on healthy aging, she realized something important. She had stopped living her own life. So, she changed course. She joined a bridge group at her local senior center, started gardening again, and even planned a small weekend trip with a friend from church. As her focus shifted back toward herself, her children noticed. They started calling more, not out of duty, but out of curiosity. They wanted to hear about her latest project or see pictures of her garden. They began respecting her time again, not because she demanded it, but because she was now living as someone with a full, beautiful life of her own. And that's the final truth. People respect those who respect themselves. When you stop overextending, stop chasing appreciation, and start building a life filled with meaning, hobbies, and friendships, something inside you changes. You begin to glow with a quiet confidence that others can't help but notice. So if you feel that your children no longer respect you the way they once did, ask yourself this: am I showing them a life worth respecting? Not a perfect life, but a life lived with intention, dignity, and joy. In the end, respect isn't something you can beg for or demand. It is something you inspire. Through the boundaries you set, the way you carry yourself, and the richness of the life you lead. Your journey is far from over. In fact, it may just be beginning. One rooted in renewed confidence, emotional independence, and a deep sense of self-worth that speaks louder than words ever could.